They say blood is thicker than water. But in the Daniels family, blood was just a currency, and I was perpetually bankrupt. My name is Lucas, and for 25 years, I was the black sheep of a $5 million empire. While my younger brother Julian, the family's golden child, spent my parents' fortune on luxury cars and ego-driven failures, I was evicted from my own bedroom and forced to sleep in a drafty, unheated garage just to give him a gaming suite. They treated me like a ghost in a mansion they thought they owned. But they forgot one thing. My grandfather Silas built this house from the dirt up, and he didn't like how they were treating the foundation. He left a secret clause in his will, a legal time bomb set to detonate on my 25th birthday. Yesterday, the clock hit 0. And today, I'm the landlord, and the golden child is about to find out exactly how cold it gets in that garage. Welcome to ThreadVerse. My name is Lucas Daniels. To understand how I ended up living in a garage, you have to understand the architecture of my family. My father, Richard, was a man who measured success by the length of his shadow. He was a high-stakes hedge fund manager who believed that if you weren't winning, you were invisible. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman who saw the world as a giant social stage, and her children were merely props in her performance of the perfect life. Then there was Julian. My brother, born 2 years after me, was the sun around which my parents orbited. If Julian sneezed, my mother called a specialist. If I broke my arm falling off my bike, my father told me to walk it off because men don't leak. I remember my 10th birthday. I had been asking for a set of professional drawing pencils and a drafting board for months. I wanted to build things. I wanted to understand how buildings stood up against the wind. On the morning of my birthday, my parents handed me a 2-pack of socks and told me they were practical. 2 hours later, they surprised Julian with a brand new, customized go-kart because he had shown interest in racing that morning at breakfast. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the gaze. My parents' eyes would light up whenever Julian walked into a room, even if he had done nothing but exist. When I walked in, their eyes would glaze over, or they would find a chore for me to do. I became the invisible architect, the one who kept the house running while Julian took the credit for the view. By the time we hit high school, the gap had widened into a canyon. Julian was the star athlete who never practiced, the popular kid who failed every class but was always gifted a passing grade by the school board because of my father's donations. I was the quiet kid in the back of the class, working 2 part-time jobs at a local hardware store and a construction site just to save for college. "Why are you wasting your time hauling lumber, Lucas?" my father would sneer as I came home covered in sawdust. "You look like a common laborer. Look at Julian. He's networking at the yacht club. That's where real power is." "I like knowing how things work, Dad," I'd say, my voice steady despite the sting of his words. "Knowing how things work is for the people we hire," he'd retort. "People like us just know how to own the things that work." That was the Daniels philosophy. Ownership over effort. Image over substance. Little did he know, he was teaching me the exact lesson I would eventually use to dismantle his world. The real betrayal didn't happen in a single moment. It was a slow erosion. But the night I was truly discarded is etched into my memory like a scar. It was the winter of my junior year in college. I was home for break, exhausted from a semester of 20-unit course loads and a job at an architectural firm in the city. I had worked until 2 a.m. every night to afford my tuition, because my parents had redirected my college fund to pay for Julian's 3rd attempt at starting an influencer management company. I pulled into the driveway at midnight, dragging my suitcase through the snow. I wanted nothing more than to collapse into my bed, the one with the firm mattress that helped my aching back. But when I opened my bedroom door, I didn't see my bed. I didn't see my drafting table. I saw neon blue LED strips. I saw 3 massive 4K monitors. I saw a professional-grade gaming chair that probably cost more than my car. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice echoing in the hollow room. My mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe that cost $3,000. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that I was there to witness her improvement. "Oh, Lucas, you're back," she said, checking her manicure. "We decided that since you're never really here, Julian needed the extra space. He started a professional streaming channel, and your room has the best acoustics for his gaming suite." "My room? Mom, where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my drafting table? My projects?" "We moved your things," my father said, appearing behind her, his arms crossed over his chest. "We've set up the back section of the garage. We put down some high-grade industrial mats, a nice cot, and we even bought you a high-end space heater. It's quiet out there. You've always complained about Julian's noise, haven't you? Now you have your own studio." "The garage, Dad? You moved your son into the garage so Julian can play video games in a bigger room." "Julian is building a brand, Lucas," my father barked. "He's a creator. You're just a student. You don't need a suite. You need a place to crash. Now, Quit being a martyr and go check out the garage. We even left you a box of those protein bars you like. I stood there, looking at my parents. In that moment, the last thread of filial loyalty snapped. I looked past them at Julian, who was sitting in my old room, wearing a headset, screaming at a screen. He didn't even look at me. He just raised a hand in a mock wave and went back to his game. I walked to the garage. It was a 3-car space, filled with my father's classic Jaguar and my mother's SUV. In the far corner, behind a stack of winter tires, was a small, military-style cot. My drafting table was shoved against the cold concrete wall, covered in a plastic tarp. The space heater hummed, but the cold of the Connecticut winter seeped through the uninsulated door like a physical weight. I sat on that cot, my breath blooming in the air, and I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took out my notebook and I wrote a single sentence. An architect knows that when the structure is this rotten, you don't renovate. You wait for the demolition. The only person who didn't buy into the golden Julian myth was my grandfather, Silas. He was the one who had built the Daniels' fortune from nothing. He started as a carpenter, then a contractor, then a developer. He was a man of the earth, and he hated what his son, my father, had become. Silas would visit once a month. He would walk past the grand foyer, past the crystal chandeliers, and come straight to the garage. He'd sit on my cot, his old, calloused hands resting on his cane, and he'd watch me draw. "You have the eyes, Lucas," he said one evening, his voice a low rumble. "You see the lines. You see the truth of a building." "They moved me out here, Grandpa," I said, not looking up from my sketch of a bridge. "They think I'm part of the storage." "Let them think that," Silas whispered, a strange glint in his eyes. "A building is most vulnerable during the excavation. No one sees what's happening underground. They only care about the gold paint on the walls. But you and I, we know that the foundation is everything." He died when I was 22. At the funeral, my father and mother were already discussing how they would refresh the mansion with their inheritance. Julian was checking the prices of Lamborghinis on his phone during the eulogy. But when the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, read the will, the atmosphere turned ice cold. "The estate," Mr. Sterling announced to the crowded room, "including the mansion and the $20 million trust, is to be held in a conditional protective trust. My son Richard and his wife Eleanor are granted life tenancy, provided they maintain the property. However, the full title and executive control will remain locked until a specific condition is met." "What condition?" my father had demanded, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "The condition," Mr. Sterling said, looking directly at me, "is time and the integrity of the residence." My parents took that to mean they just had to wait. They assumed the money was theirs. They spent the next 3 years borrowing against their future inheritance, racking up debt, and treating me like the household servant. I was the one they called to fix the leak in the roof. I was the one they told to mow the 5-acre lawn because it builds character. I played the part. I worked my job at the firm by day, and I did their manual labor by night. I lived in that garage for 4 years. I shivered through 4 winters. I watched them throw parties in the house I was barred from. But I was also in constant contact with Mr. Sterling. Every time they insulted me, every time they refused to heat the garage, every time Julian used my old room to throw a drunken party that damaged the walls, I documented it. I sent photos. I sent logs. I was building a case like I was building a skyscraper. Stone by stone. Floor by floor. And then, yesterday morning, I woke up in the garage. It was my 25th birthday. The sun was hitting the concrete floor, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel cold. I checked my phone. There was one message. It was from Mr. Sterling. "The foundation has settled, Lucas. It's time to move in." The air in Mr. Sterling's office didn't smell like the mahogany and expensive perfume of my parents' world. It smelled like old paper, heavy leather books, and something much more satisfying: expensive justice. Mr. Sterling was 72 years old, with eyes that had seen every trick in the book. He had been my grandfather's closest friend and only confidant. As I sat across from him on the morning of my 25th birthday, he didn't offer me a celebratory drink or a cheerful happy birthday. He simply slid a thick, black fountain pen across the desk toward me. "Your grandfather, Silas, was a man who understood load-bearing walls, Lucas," Sterling began, leaning back in his chair. "He knew that your father, Richard, was a man built on sand. He knew your mother, Eleanor, was all facade and no structure. And he knew that if he left them the money outright, they would use it to bury you." I picked up the pen. It was heavy. It felt like a weapon. "He told me to wait for 25. I didn't know I'd be waiting in a garage, Mr. Sterling." "Actually," Sterling said, a thin, predatory smile touching his lips, "he knew you'd end up in that garage. Or somewhere worse. He knew their character. That's why the will has what we call a poison pill clause. Specifically, Section 8.4, the Integrity and Respect Covenant. I opened the folder to the page he indicated. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. The life tenancy granted to Richard and Eleanor Daniels is contingent upon the respectful and dignified treatment of the primary heir, Lucas Daniels. Specifically, should Lucas be denied access to the primary dwelling, relegated to substandard living quarters on the property, or subjected to financial withholding while the secondary heir, Julian, is granted preferential treatment, the life tenancy is immediately and irrevocably terminated. Substandard living quarters, I whispered. The garage. Exactly, Sterling said. I have the photos you've been sending me for 4 years. The time-stamped images of the thermometer showing 40 degrees inside that garage. The photos of your drafting table covered in oil stains. I also have the private investigator's report. Did you know I've had a forensic accountant tracking the trust's spending? I shook my head. I just thought they were being greedy. It's worse than greed, Lucas. It's theft. Your father has been borrowing against the trust's future value to fund Julian's lifestyle. He spent nearly $3 million that didn't belong to him. He thought he could just pay it back when the trust fully transferred to him at 50. He never realized the trust doesn't transfer to him. It transfers to you. Sterling handed me a second document, a formal notice of termination of occupancy. Today, you aren't just the heir, Lucas. You are the sole owner of the Daniels estate. Every car, every piece of furniture, every cent in the bank belongs to you. And because of their breach of the respect covenant, you have the legal right to remove them today. Not in 30 days. Today. I felt a cold, architectural clarity settle over me. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the architect of their downfall. I don't want to just remove them, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice as steady as a concrete slab. I want them to understand the value of $1. The same value they tried to teach me while I was shivering in that garage. Then sign the execution order, Sterling said. And I'll have the marshals on standby. But I suspect you want to handle the first inspection yourself. I signed the paper. The ink was black and permanent, just like their fate. I didn't drive my old, battered truck back to the mansion. I called a high-end car service. If I was going to reclaim my kingdom, I wasn't going to do it smelling like sawdust and exhaust. When the sleek black sedan pulled up the long, winding driveway of the Daniels estate, I saw Julian's BMW parked crookedly near the fountain. The lawn was pristine, mostly because I was the one who had mowed it 3 days ago under my mother's screaming orders. I walked to the front door, not the side door, not the service entrance. The grand, hand-carved oak doors that cost $50,000 and were meant to keep the commoners out. I pushed them open. The house was quiet, except for the faint thud-thud-thud of bass coming from the second floor. Julian's studio. My mother, Eleanor, was in the dining room, instructing a maid on how to polish the silver for Julian's upcoming yacht party. She looked up, her face instantly morphing into a mask of pure annoyance. Lucas? What on earth are you doing? You're tracked in mud. And why are you using the front door? I told you specifically that the foyer is being prepared for the gala guests. I didn't answer. I just walked past her toward the grand staircase. Lucas, did you hear me? She shrieked, her voice hitting that high, glass-shattering frequency. Richard, come here. Your son has finally lost his mind. My father, Richard, stepped out of his study, holding a glass of scotch even though it was only 11 in the morning. He looked at me with the same disdain he'd show a cockroach in his kitchen. Lucas, get back to the garage. I don't care what your excuse is. You don't enter this house without permission. Do I need to remind you who pays for the roof over your head? Actually, Dad, I said, stopping at the first landing and looking down at them. I think I should be the one reminding you. Because as of 9 a.m. this morning, you're the ones living under my roof. And the permission just ran out. Richard laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. You've been breathing too much sawdust, boy. This is Silas's house. And I am Silas's son. And I am Silas's heir, I said, pulling the notarized execution order from my coat pocket. Section 8.4, Richard. The Respect Covenant. You moved me into a garage for 4 years while you spent Silas's money on Julian's ego. That was a breach of contract. A fatal one. I didn't wait for him to grab the paper. I turned and ran up the stairs toward my old bedroom. Lucas, stop. Richard roared, his scotch glass shattering on the marble floor as he chased after me. I reached the door to my room, the one with the neon J-Zone sign. I didn't knock. I kicked the door so hard the frame splintered. Inside, the room was a neon-lit nightmare. Julian was sitting in his chair, a headset on, laughing at a screen. He didn't even notice me until I walked over to the main power hub, the one that fueled his 3 monitors, his high-end PC, and his sound system. I grabbed the thick, braided power cord and ripped it from the wall with a violent jerk. Zap! The room went dead. The silence was sudden and heavy. What the? Julian ripped his headset off, his face twisting into a snarl. Lucas? Are you trying to die? I was mid-match. That was a $10,000 tournament. Dad, Lucas is breaking my stuff. Richard and Eleanor burst into the room, gasping for air. Richard snatched the folder from my hand, his eyes scanning the legal seals. As he read, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might collapse. It's a full execution, Richard whispered, his voice trembling. He didn't just leave you the money, Lucas. He left you the title. Everything. Everything. I confirmed, looking around the room. Julian, you have 60 minutes to pack your toys. Anything left in this room at noon goes into the wood chipper I have parked in the driveway. And Dad, Mom, you might want to start looking for your suitcases. The servant just became the landlord. For the next hour, the Daniels mansion sounded like a sinking ship. Julian was screaming, Eleanor was sobbing into a silk handkerchief, and Richard was frantically calling his lawyers, all of whom, I knew, had already been briefed by Mr. Sterling and had told Richard the same thing. You're finished. I sat at the grand dining table, the same place where I'd been forced to wait on them like a waiter during their dinner parties. I had a stopwatch running on my phone. At exactly noon, Julian stumbled down the stairs, carrying a box of his expensive graphics cards and a designer duffel bag. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you're so smart, Lucas? Julian spat. You're just a bitter loser. You'll be alone in this big house while we go out and build something real. With what money, Julian? I asked, not looking up from my phone. The trust accounts are frozen. The credit cards, the ones tied to the Daniels estate, were deactivated 10 minutes ago. And that BMW in the driveway? It's registered to the trust. I've already called the tow truck. Julian's face went white. You can't take my car. That was a gift from a trust you were stealing from, I said. Now, the garage is open. There's a cot and a space heater waiting for you. Or, you can walk to the end of the driveway and call an Uber. Though I doubt you have the balance on your personal card for a ride to the city. Eleanor walked down the stairs then, looking like she'd aged 10 years in an hour. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was pleading. Lucas, please. We are your family. We made mistakes, yes, but we gave you a life. We gave you an education. I gave myself an education, Mom, I said. I worked 30 hours a week on top of my architecture degree because you told me you couldn't afford my tuition while you bought Julian's third car. You didn't give me a life. You gave me a garage. I stood up and looked at the three of them. The Golden family now reduced to a huddle of terrified shadows. I'm not a monster, I said, and for a second, a flicker of hope crossed my father's eyes. I'm an architect, and an architect knows that you can't build a new house on a rotten foundation. So, here's the deal. I've filed the paperwork for the embezzlement charges, Richard. $2 million. I can send that to the district attorney right now, and you'll spend your retirement in a federal prison. Richard slumped against the wall, his bravado completely gone. What do you want, Lucas? I want you to learn what I learned, I said. I'm giving you a 30-day character-building lease. You can stay in the mansion, but not in the master suites. You three will share the guest wing. No maids. No caterers. No gardeners. I pulled out a list, a long, detailed architectural punch list. Richard, you're the new groundskeeper. 5 acres of lawn, hand-mowed. Eleanor, you're the housekeeper. This mansion will be spotless every morning at 8 a.m. And Julian, you're the maintenance boy. The pool needs scrubbing, the gutters need clearing, and the basement needs a full mold remediation. You want us to be your servants? Julian hissed. I want you to be productive members of society. I corrected him. You do the work, you stay for 30 days while you find a job. You complain, you refuse, or you step foot in my master suite, and I call the DA and the marshals. The choice is yours. Does the garage sound better now, Julian? Julian looked at the front door, then at the garage, then at me. He realized, for the first time in his life, that his golden child status had no value here. I'll get the lawnmower, Richard whispered, his voice broken. I watched them walk toward the service entrance. The same entrance they had forced me to use for years. As I stood in the center of the grand foyer, the silence of the house finally felt right. It wasn't the silence of neglect anymore. It was the silence of a structure that had finally been leveled. And now, the real rebuilding could begin. The first week of the Daniels Reformatory, as I like to call it, was a spectacle of poetic justice. I spent my mornings on the wraparound porch, sipping high-end espresso and reviewing blueprints for a local library project. From my vantage point, I had a front-row seat to the systematic dismantling of my family's pride. Richard, a man who used to scream at waiters if his steak was 5 degrees off, was now struggling with a manual push mower. I had intentionally hidden the keys to the riding mower. I told him it was out of service, even though it worked perfectly. Watching a 60-year-old hedge fund manager in a sweat-stained Ralph Lauren polo gasping for air while trying to tackle 5 acres of Kentucky bluegrass was a sight no amount of money could buy. "Lucas," he yelled, leaning against the handle, his face the color of a ripe tomato. "This is insane. I'm going to have a heart attack. Call a professional landscaping crew. I'll pay for it." "With what money, Richard?" I asked, not looking up from my sketches. "Your personal accounts have a balance of exactly $42. And remember, the respect covenant says you do the work. If a crew shows up, I call the district attorney about that $2 million audit. Keep pushing. The north side is looking a bit ragged." Inside the house, the atmosphere was even more tense. Eleanor, who had once spent $10,000 on a single charity gala dress, was now knee-deep in suds. I had deactivated the high-end industrial dishwasher. She had to wash every crystal glass and silver plate by hand. I walked into the kitchen to find her staring at a pile of laundry with an expression of pure horror. How do you get the scent of grass out of these shirts?" she whispered, her hands red and wrinkled from the water. "You scrub, Mom," I said, leaning against the marble island she used to guard like a fortress. "Just like I used to scrub the grease off my drafting table in the garage. It builds resilience, remember? Your words, not mine." But Julian was the most entertaining to watch. I had him on pool duty. It wasn't just skimming leaves. I made him drain the decorative fountain in the foyer and scrub the grout with a toothbrush. "This is beneath me," Julian hissed, his designer jeans soaked and ruined. "I'm a content creator. My fans are wondering where I am. I'm losing followers every hour." "Tell them you're doing a real-life challenge, Julian," I suggested. "Call it the 24-hour servant challenge." "Oh, wait, it's not 24 hours. It's a month. Scrub harder." I can still see the algae. By day 10, the bravado had vanished. They were exhausted, sore, and for the first time in their lives, they were actually sleeping through the night because they were too tired to argue. But I knew they weren't defeated yet. An architect knows that a cornered structure will always try to shift its weight. On the 15th night, I was woken up by a faint scratching sound. It wasn't Buster, and it wasn't the wind. It was coming from the floorboards near my grandfather's old study, which I had converted into my primary office. I didn't turn on the lights. I'm an architect. I know the layout of this house in the dark better than I know my own face. I grabbed my tablet, which was linked to the hidden security cameras I had installed the day I took ownership. On the screen, in grainy night vision, I saw them. Richard and Eleanor. They were in the study, frantically pulling books off the shelves, tapping on the wood panels, searching for something. "It has to be here," Eleanor whispered, her voice sharp with desperation. Silas was old-fashioned. He wouldn't have kept the original physical will in a digital vault. There has to be a paper copy with a later date. Something that supersedes Lucas's version. "I checked the safe behind the painting," Richard hissed. "Empty. If we find a later version, even a draft, we can tie this up in court for years. We can get the trust back." "I can't live like this, Eleanor. My back is killing me, and I smell like gasoline and fertilizer." I watched them for 20 minutes. It was pathetic. They weren't looking for justice. They were looking for a loophole to keep their lie alive. They finally found a small, hidden compartment under the floorboards, a space Silas used to keep his old carpentry tools. Richard pulled out a dusty, leather-bound folder. "This is it," he gasped. "Look, it's the original architectural plans for the estate, and there's a document clipped to the back." I decided it was time to join the party. I flipped the master switch. The study was suddenly flooded with bright, white light. Richard and Eleanor jumped, nearly dropping the folder. "Looking for a way out, Dad?" I asked, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed. "Lucas, we heard a noise." Eleanor stammered, trying to hide the folder behind her back. "Give it to me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. Richard, emboldened by the paper in his hand, stood his ground. "No, this is a family matter. I have a right to see my father's private papers." "That folder contains the original 1985 survey maps of the property," I said. "And the document clipped to the back is the receipt for the lumber used to build the garage you put me in. There is no secret will, Richard. Silas didn't leave a backup plan for you. He spent 10 years planning your exit because he knew exactly who you were." I stepped forward and snatched the folder from his hands. "This is strike one," I said. "The respect covenant includes not breaking into my office at 3 a.m. to look for ways to sue me. One more move like this, and I call the DA tomorrow morning. Go back to your wing. And Eleanor, the foyer floors need waxing at 7 a.m. Don't be late." As they shuffled out of the room, looking like beaten dogs, I realized the final week was going to be the hardest. They were desperate, and desperate people don't just shift, they collapse. Week 3 was when Julian finally snapped. The golden child had been reduced to a shadow of his former self. His skin was tanned from the sun, his hands were calloused, and his expensive haircuts were a mess. But the psychological toll was worse. Without the constant validation of his social media followers and my parents' praise, he was nothing. I was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, when Julian stormed in. He wasn't carrying a pool skimmer this time. He was carrying a heavy, rusted crowbar he'd found in the shed. "I'm done," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm done with this character-building garbage. You think you're better than me? You're just a nerd who got lucky because a dead old man liked you. I'm the one who should have this house. I'm the star. You're just the guy who draws lines on paper." He swung the crowbar, smashing a glass-fronted cabinet. Shards of expensive crystal rained down onto the floor. "Julian, stop," I said, not moving an inch. "You're making a mistake that's going to cost you the next decade of your life." "I don't care," he shrieked, raising the crowbar again. "I'll burn this place to the ground before I let you have it. If I can't have the view, no one can." Richard and Eleanor rushed into the kitchen, alerted by the crashing sound. "Julian, put that down," Richard shouted, but there was no authority left in his voice. "No, Dad. You're a coward. You let him turn you into a gardener. I'm a Daniels. We don't mow lawns." Julian swung again, this time aiming for the marble countertop. I stepped forward, grabbed his wrist with the strength I'd built from years of construction work, and twisted. The crowbar clattered to the floor. "You're right about one thing, Julian," I said, pinning him against the counter. "You are a Daniels. But Silas Daniels was a man who built things. You're just a parasite who destroys them. And parasites aren't allowed in this house anymore." I looked at my parents, who were frozen in horror. "The 30 days are over," I said. "I was going to let you finish the month, but your son just committed aggravated assault and felony property damage. The character-building experiment is officially a failure." I pulled out my phone and hit a speed dial button. "Mr. Sterling? Send the marshals. And call the police. We have a domestic disturbance and an embezzlement suspect ready for pickup." "Lucas, no," Eleanor cried, falling to her knees. "Please. He's just a boy. He didn't mean it." "He's 23 years old, Mom," I said, looking down at her. "When I was 23, I was sleeping in a garage and working 60 hours a week. He's not a boy. He's a consequence of your parenting. And today, the bill is due." The departure of the Daniels family wasn't the grand, dramatic exit they would have wanted. There were no news cameras, no weeping crowds. Just 2 police cruisers and a moving van I'd hired to take their personal clothes to a small, 2-bedroom apartment I'd rented for them in a less-than-glamorous part of town. Richard and Eleanor were allowed to leave without handcuffs, but only because I signed a document stating I wouldn't press charges for the embezzlement, provided they stayed away from me and the estate forever. They were essentially being exiled. Julian, however, wasn't so lucky. He was taken away in the back of a cruiser for the property damage and the attempted assault. I didn't press for the maximum sentence, but I made sure he'd have to do 500 hours of community service. Specifically, cleaning up construction sites. I thought it was a fitting education. I stood on the grand front steps as the moving van pulled away. Richard looked out the window one last time. Our eyes met. There was no hatred left in his expression, only a hollow, haunting realization that he had traded his son's love for a lifestyle he couldn't afford. I walked back into the house. It felt different. The air was still, but it didn't feel stagnant. It felt like a building that had finally been vented of a toxic gas. Over the next 6 months, I didn't live in the mansion as a hermit. I didn't need 50 rooms for myself. I'm an architect. I know that a building's purpose is determined by who it serves. I kept the master wing for myself, but I converted the rest of the estate into the Silas Daniels Foundation for Architectural Heritage. It became a sanctuary for students like I used to be, kids with talent but no resources. We built dorms in the guest wings. We turned the ballroom into a massive drafting studio. And the garage? I didn't tear it down. I renovated it. I turned it into a museum, a single room preserved exactly as it was when I lived there. The cot, the space heater, the drafting table with the oil stains. I wanted the students to see it. I wanted them to know that the most beautiful structures aren't built on gold. They're built on the resilience you find when you have nothing else. One evening, I was walking the grounds. The lawn was pristine, mostly because I'd hired a professional crew who actually liked their job. The 5 sapling Gary oaks I'd planted were starting to take root, their leaves whispering in the Connecticut breeze. I sat on the porch, the same spot where Richard had collapsed in exhaustion months ago. I realized that my grandfather hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a puzzle. He wanted to see if I was strong enough to survive the excavation so I could be the one to design the future. The black sheep was gone. The servant was gone. The architect was home. And the foundation? It was finally, perfectly, unbreakable. Thanks for sticking around until the very end of this journey. Lucas's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the people who are meant to protect us are the ones who try to break us the most. But as any architect will tell you, The heat and pressure of the earth are exactly what turns carbon into diamonds. Lucas didn't just win a house. He won his dignity, and he turned a place of pain into a foundation for the future. If you felt a rush of satisfaction when Lucas ripped that power cord out of the wall, do me a huge favor, smash that like button. It really helps the ThreadVerse community grow and brings more stories of justice, karma, and incredible revenge to your feed every single day. Also, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join us. We explore the deepest corners of human nature and the incredible ways that justice finally finds its way home. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been the black sheep in your family? How did you prove them wrong? I read every single one of your stories, and I can't wait to see your thoughts on this one. Stay loyal, stay sharp, and always remember, never judge a person by the room they sleep in. Judge them by the life they build. I'll see you in the next one.